A week ago, it was a week ago last Friday, I had the unfortunate experience to have to visit a family that was sitting Shiva for their beloved father. There's the family of Rabbi Avi Goldberg. I think everyone heard the story. His daughter is not in the same class, but attends the same school as my daughter. And therefore, we felt very connected to them, and for a lot of reasons, I'll spare the whole story. But the request that was made when they announced the Shiva details for this family was that if politicians were going to come to visit during the Shiva, that the politicians should come in pairs, okay, with one representative of with one representative of the government and one representative of the opposition. And that was and Baruch Hashem, they succeeded in communicating this message. And my understanding is that any politicians that came to this Shiva, that's exactly what they had. They had at least some level, some demonstration of unity and achdus out of sensitivity for the Goldberg family. And this idea of achdus and unity here in Eretz Yisrael is an idea that we know has been at the forefront over the past number of years, and really since the founding of the State of Israel, and even since before the founding of the State of Israel. This idea of unity here, that the Jewish people are building the future of OUisrael here, and in order for us to really succeed and really build what we're meant to build here, it requires what? Achdus, unity. And I want to therefore this morning focus on this topic of Achdus, and specifically, as we know, this is a new course called Modern Masters. We're going to hear from two Hasidic masters. They made Aliyah to Israel before the establishment of the State of Israel, and both of whom, in their own way, contributed to supporting the entity that would become Medinat Yisrael, which in terms of the way we see the world today, is very, very uncommon. That Admoria Hasidut would be perceived as being supportive of the enterprise that is Medinat Yisrael. And we're going to talk about, learn from their Torah, maybe get a glimpse in terms of who they were and why they were supportive. And you'll see that this theme of Achdus is central to the way they view building the Yishuv here in Eretz Yisrael. So we're going to start first with Gemara and Bava Metzia, just to set the tone. The Gemara in Bava Metzia tells us, Rabbi Zy'a, Kisalik La'ar the Yisrael, when Rabbi Zy'a came on Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, Yetiv Meya Ta'aneta L'ishtakeach Gemara Bavleha Mineha. He says, the Gemara says that Rabbi Zy'a fasted 100 fasts in order that all the scholarship that he had accumulated in Bavel would be forgotten. Because he didn't want it to be an impediment to his learning here in Eretz Yisrael. So let's think about this Gemara for a minute. Okay, it's very interesting because today most people learn the Bavli, most people learn the Babylonian Talmud, because the Babylonian Talmud is seen as being more intellectually rigorous or more or easier even to understand than the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi is very, very very short, terse, quick statements. There's none of the back and forth discourse of the Bavli. And the reason is that the Bavli is really a historical record of hundreds of years of debates, of discussion, of debates, of disagreements in terms of how the halakha was meant to be interpreted. And that's why the Bavli is considered more intellectually rigorous, because you see the thought process, you see the discussion, you see the debates. While the Yerushalmi kind of just cuts right to the chase. And now maybe we understand why. Because listen to what Rashi says about our Gemara. What does it mean that he didn't want all his scholarship from Bavel to be an impediment to his learning here in Eretz Yisrael? Okay, Kisha'al al Eretz Yisrael lilmod mipi Rabbi Yochanan u'morayin shebe'Eretz Yisrael lo hayu b'nei machloket. Okay, when he came to Eretz Yisrael, he came to learn from Rabbi Yochanan and the other Amoraim who were living here in Eretz Yisrael at the time, and he wanted to learn their ways. And they were not what? B'nei machloket. They didn't argue with one another. V'nochin ze lezeh keshemen. And they were pleasant to one another like fine oil. K'da'amrina b'Sanhedrin u'meishivin et ha'ta'amim below kushiot u'peirukin. That they answered one another without harshness and without rudeness. Now, if we think about our leadership today, okay, there's a message encrypted in this Gemara, right? But listen to this powerful interpretation of Rashi explaining our Gemara. Rashi says that Rabbi Zera, when he came to Eretz Yisrael, he wanted to leave behind the way of Bavel, the way of disagreement and disharmony and conflict. He wanted to embrace the Torah of Eretz Yisrael, which was, at least then, at the time, seemingly, a Torah of unity. A Torah where people respected one another, where they learned from one another, where they heard one another. What a powerful message. So it's interesting, Rav Kook. So I guess we're going to hear from three modern masters today, because we're going to learn a one-liner from Rav Kook also. Rav Kook, on the bottom of your sheets here, Rav Kook says, Torah Eretz Yisrael doeget tamid be'ada klal. Rav Kook says that the Torah of Eretz Yisrael is constantly concerned about what? The entire entity of the Jewish people. True, the Torah that's meant to be learned here in Eretz Yisrael, the Torah that, this is also a very important message. The Torah that's learned here in Eretz Yisrael is supposed to be a Torah that unites us, that brings us together, that's concerned about the klal, bi'al klalut nishmata umakula, that is concerned about what? The collective soul of the entire nation. Well, this is our introduction. We're going to learn from two other modern masters besides Rav Kook this morning. The first individual we're going to learn from is the Avodas Elazar, Rabbi Yisrael Elazar Hapstein, Schusal Yagin Aleinu, the Rabbi of Kushnitz, the great grandson of the famous Maggid of Kushnitz, Rabbi Yisrael Hapstein. And the Avodas Elazar of Kushnitz is one of three Hasidic masters who were involved in founding what was meant to be a Hasidic farming community, okay, in the 1920s in near Haifa called Kfar Hasidim. That city still exists, Kfar Hasidim, today. It is no longer a Hasidic farming village. Unfortunately, it did not succeed initially, and it did not succeed initially to build. They did not succeed, these three Admorim, and we'll talk about them in a moment, in building this Hasidic farming village, and therefore it was eventually taken over by the Ohalei Mizrahi, the religious farmers, and they helped save the Yishuv, but the religious Zionist farmers, they helped save the Yishuv, but initially they had this vision of bringing Hasidim here, and not just to live here, but to work the land, and to be Mekayim the mitzvos atluos ba'aretz, and to teach them about the ways of the mitzvos atluos ba'aretz. So it's very interesting because we're going to touch on this in this piece, okay? So he is one of three Hasidic masters that, together with the Admor HaChalutz, the brother of the Piasetz and the Rabbi, who we learned from last week, okay? Rabbi Yeshaya Horowitz, Rabbi Yeshaya Shapira, who was known as the Admor HaChalutz. He came in Aliyah and kind of gave away or took off the classical garb of a Hasidic Rebbe and would go from farming village to farming village to give chizuk to the Chalutzim who are building up the land here in Eretz Yisrael, and he becomes lovingly known as the Admor Chalutz, and there are pictures of him riding on a horse with a cowboy's hat. So he's one of these three rabbis, together with a very, very, and maybe we'll do a talk about him, a very enigmatic and interesting, and even on a certain level, for part of his life, troublesome personality, the Rebbe of Yablon, the Yabloner Rebbe, who was actively involved in building Kfar Hasidim, together with this Rebbe, the Avodas Elazar Kushnitz. He eventually settles in downtown Tel Aviv, where his shtibel, there's still a Kushnitz shtibel, an active community of Kushnitz Hasidim in downtown Tel Aviv. His grandson is now the Rebbe. He splits his time between Tel Aviv and the Upper West Side of Manhattan, because he's a very metropolitan Hasidic Rebbe. Anyways, we're going to learn from the Avodas Elazar. The Avodas Elazar, by the way, is the brother-in-law of the Piasetz, the Rebbe that we learned from last week. and he actually is buried here in the cemetery in Sanhedria. You can actually go down in his kevra. His yard set is Bet Elul, which is my daughter's birthday. So I always remember his yard set. I try to get to his kevra to daven there. Anyways, we're going to learn, and maybe another time when we learn from more of his Torah, I'll share the full story of the Avodas Elazar. But just because we're a little bit quick on time, I want to learn his Torah this morning. So this is the first side of the second sheet. And he says, "B'Torah Teinu Kedusha She Nitzachit." In our holy Torah, which is eternal, Remez Yesh Ba L'Dorot Olam. There are things alluded to that are relevant for all generations. V'hinei b'zmanenu anu hitrachesh davar mufla biyoter. And in our times, we've witnessed and experienced something more wondrous than we could have ever imagined. V'hu hakamat medinat Yehudit be'Eretz Yisrael. And that's the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Yisrael. So this Rebbe, first of all, sees what? Hakamat Medinat Yisrael, the establishment of the state of Israel, as something wondrous and something we could have never imagined. We should embrace. Va'af amnan shelo al zeh chalamnu, v'lo l'geula hazu kivinu v'palalnu b'meshech alpayim shana. Even though this is not exactly the vision that we had and that we davened for 2,000 years, b'chol zeh harei higia elenu ezek keren or min hashamayim. Despite the fact that it's not perfect, it's not exactly what we've been davening for, Hashem has given us what? A ray of light, a beginning, a starting point from the heavens. V'anachnu mitzapim shekeren orzu titrachev v'titkadel. And we hope and pray that this little ray of light will what? Will broaden and grow and continue to grow. Umimena tavo geula hamitit. And from it will come what? The true redemption. All right. He says, Haba nitbonen ketzad kiblu pnei hatchalat ha'geula hazot achenu b'nei Yisrael ha'minim v'ha'mismolim. But when we begin to contemplate how this first start of the geula, this little, the establishment of the state has been viewed and been and is taken upon by those on the right and those on the left. We have to think about this and understand this. V'nada ke'elu ve'elu shigoy b'gisutehem. And we have to say that both of them are a little bit confused and misguided in their interpretations of the significance of the establishment of the state of Israel. Why? Now he's going to explain. Otam shemei small samchim ha'geula zy'a zot ke'ilu kvar noshanu b'Yeshua hamleah uke'ilu zot hi ha'geula hamitit. He says those to the left, what? They're already celebrating as if what? We've now got to the end of the story. The story is complete. We've got the geula, the true geulas here. Umima she'ha'geula azot ba b'derech hateva. And most specifically, since this geula seems to have come through natural means, through the UN and through the first Balfour and then the UN and natural means, heim sovrim she'ein lanu shum asik im Torah v'mitzvos. They say what? We don't need to have any more connection with Torah mitzvos, okay? Va'ikar hi Yeshua v'Yeshuva Eretz Yisrael. Because the essence is what? The fact that we've come home and we're building up the land and dwelling in the land of Israel. That's, he says, is the attitude of the secularists on the left. And obviously, Hasidic Rabbi would disagree strongly with that perspective, right? But what about those on the right that seemingly would be more in line with those of a religious bent? V'otam shemiyamin. This is the next piece. Poslim et yoshri haaretz. And those on the right, they want to write off and say those that are settling the land and building up the land are puzzle, are not kosher, they're not valid. Okay? B'ta'anam she'ein lahem zchut al Eretz Yisrael minei she'einam shomrim Torah. And they say what? They're not deserving to be here in Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because they're not keeping the Torah. Ukvar nitba'er she'ein Eretz Yisrael b'li Torah mitzvahs. As we've already described elsewhere, that you can't see the fulfillment of the Jewish people building their future here in Eretz Yisrael without Torah mitzvahs. Ach gam elu toim. But even they're also wrong. Why? Ki afa pi shebevada yesh lekavot yipalel shekulam yachzeru b'tshuva. That even though, of course, we daven that everyone will indeed do tshuva, anam gam lahem yesh askut al Eretz Yisrael. But even they that are not yet from, they do have the skut of Eretz Yisrael. And he's going to explain why. V'alzeh ramza haTorah Amar Hashem la'Avraham. That when Hashem says to Avraham, Ani Hashem asher tzeticha me'or kastim latet lecha et ha'aretz hazot. Okay? Hashem says, I am the God that took you, saved you from Or Kasdim, in order that what? That I gave you this land. Chishev Avraham, she'eretz Yisrael tinatein rak l'tzadikim shemosim nafsham akadushat Hashem v'torato ke'Avraham. So Avraham thought, when he heard this declaration, that Hashem is giving him the land because he's the God that rescued him from Or Kasdim when Avram was ready to go into the furnace in Or Kasdim, right, and give his life for the sake of sanctifying Hashem's name. Avraham thought, okay, what? That my descendants who are going to inherit the land are going to be people who are what? Who are willing to sanctify God's name. Okay? And Avraham asked, how do I know that they're going to be indeed inherited from me? Hainu sheyeda Avraham shelo kol hadarot yiyu b'bechinato. That Avraham saw prophetically that what? That not all the generations were going to be true to his legacy. That were going to be faithful and put their trust in God in the same way that Avram Avinu did. Uma yeh aleim, and what's going to be with them? Avram Avinu is concerned. How can I know with certainty that the Jewish people are indeed going to inherit the land? I know, I'll have a little, God, you give me the capacity of prophecy. I can see ahead and intuit that what? That not everyone's going to be from like me. So what's the implication for the Jewish people? Are they going to merit to inherit the land? V'heshiva HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then they quote a pasuk, K'chali v'gomer, and Rashi explains that pasuk. B'schut hakarbanot. How are they going to merit to inherit the land through the merit of what? The sacrifices. Kilomar. And look what the Rabbi does with that Rashi. Look what the Rabbi does with this Rashi. Kilomar af shelo yisku mitzad tzidkatam. Even though they may not be worthy in terms of their own righteousness, or their own midos, or their own shmiras mitzvos. Yisku mitzad karbonos shekrivu. They will merit because of the sacrifices that they will offer up. Shemasru nafsham al Eretz Yisrael, because they gave their lives for Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, says the Avodas Elazar of Kashas in this beautiful, powerful piece, okay, we have to see the good in those who are not yet Shomer Torah mitzvahs. Yes, we want them to embrace a Torah way of life. Yes, we daven that every single Jew will find that relationship with the Ribono Shalom. But we also have to be makir tov and acknowledge and give thanks and show our appreciation and even share in the pain for all those who have given their lives to build up the Yeshua and to protect us here in Eretz Yisrael. I think this is an eternal, even though the Rebbe said this in 1949, I think this is relevant today as when the Rebbe first said these powerful first words. Okay, so that's the Avodas Elazar. Now let's turn our sheets over. What's that? Well, we learned a piece from Rav Kook in the beginning also. You missed the introductions. Okay, but it's very similar to Rav Kook. And that's what's fascinating about these two personalities we're going to learn from this morning, is that we have this perception that the Hasidic Admorim were against the establishment of the state, or that they're not supportive of it, and it's not that black and white, as we just learned from this beautiful piece. That yes, the Rebbe says, of course, we daven that everyone should be from, but you see where he goes with this piece. The next personality we're going to learn from is the Ohalei Yaakov of Hasiyatan, who is lovingly referred to as the Admor Hatzioni, as the Zionist Admor. He came on Aliyah in 1938, escaped ahead of the Nazis, Yimach Shemam Zichram, and together with his father-in-law, who was his predecessor as the Rebbe of Hasiyatam, and they settled in downtown Tel Aviv. And this Rebbe succeeded his father-in-law, I think, in 1946, Mashu Kazeh, and was the last 11 years of his life from actually the last 20 years of his life, from 38 to 57 in Tel Aviv. But he's the Admor of Hasiyatam from 1946 to 1957, if I'm not mistaken. And he, as we'll see, his sefer is incredible for a number of reasons. Number one, every Torah gives us a glimpse into what's going on some level in Jewish history at that moment. And again, he's living through the most tumultuous times of Jewish history, the Shoah, the fight both diplomatically as well as on the battlefield to establish the state, the difficult early years of the state of Israel itself. And he gives us a glimpse of much of that through his teachings. And also, we see how much he loves both every single Jew, how much he loves Eretz Yisrael, how supportive he is of the enterprise to build the Medinat Yisrael. And just as a way of introduction, I want to share a quick idea that's not on your sheets, from a teaching of his from Hanukkah in 1950. Okay, a year and a half, after the establishment of Medinat Yisrael. And he says, first he gives us the context, the Chasidim Ma'achalim Gamar Chatima Tova B'Chanukah. So we know this greeting, Gamar Chatima Tova, that you should be inscribed for a great year from Yom Kippur. And then some even have this minhag to say it on Hoshana Rabbah, right? And when that's become very popular, that Hoshana Rabbah is really the Gemar Chasima. But by Chasidim, the Gemar Chasima is not Chanukah, not Hoshana Rabbah even, but Chanukah. And most specifically, the Geshpank of all that is Zos Chanukah, the last day of Chanukah. But he says, Chasidim are the practice to which each other, Gemar Chasima Tova on Chanukah. Yesh Adavar Zeh Makar B'Sifrei Chasidim B'Sefer Toldos Aaron. He gives the Makaros here, okay? And then, but now he says something interesting. Ukeshanu Ma'achalim Achshav Gemar Tov, He B'Chavana Kfula. But when we wish one another Gemar Tov this Chanukah, he says it's with a double entendre. Okay? And now he's going to explain why. And then he puts a parenthetic note here. His son, who put the sefer together, puts in a parenthetic note. Anashim miyushalayim bikshu biyamav achronim. Okay? L'chavot da'atel al yisod ha'medina. There was a group of people who came down from Yerushalayim to speak with my father, the Rabbi, to ask what? What's his thoughts about this state that's been established? What should our attitude be towards the state? Ana, and the Rebbe answered, Hi atchalta de geula. It's the beginning of our redemption. What? Well, Rav Kook never was zocheh to see this establishment of the state of Israel. Rav Kook dies in 1935. Okay, the state is established in 1948. So this is 13 years. Rav Kook had this vision that building up the yeshuv here should be the Atchalta de Geula, and he's the first one to coin the phrase that we want to see the state be called the state of Israel, Medinat Yisrael, right? But he was never zocheh to see it. But this Rabbi lived through the battle, both diplomatically as well as on the wars to establish the state of Israel and all the various battles. And now people are coming from Yerushalayim. I assume Hasidic Chevra from Yerushalayim are coming to talk to him and ask him, okay, Rebbe, so what do we make of this? And he answers, this state that's been established is the Atchalta de Geula, is the beginning of the redemption. Im kein la'atchalta de Geula kfar zachinu, be'ezrat Hashem yibarach. No. No. It's. I don't think so. Rav Kook uses the expression also. Okay, others use that expression, but he says, if it's true that this is the beginning of the Geula, says the Rebbe, okay, and that we've merited with Hashem's help, aval hirak b'muvana chumri, but that's only what? In terms of the physical realm. That we've returned home to Eretz Yisrael, we're building up Eretz Yisrael. Okay, v'anu tzrichin ligmar tov, she'yavo b'mehera b'yameinu, hi ha'geula ruchanit, hi ha'geula shlema b'yat HaMashiach. And therefore, when we wish each other Gemar Tov, this Hanukkah, we're not only, because we traditionally wish it on Hanukkah, but what? That we're saying that we want to see the Gemar Tov. We have the Atchalta. We have the beginning of the Geula, but we want to see the Gemar Tov. We want to see the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of a taste of the tzionut, of the beauty of the beautiful teachings of this Rabbi, the Rabbi of Hasiatan. Okay, you can look on the sheet. There's biographical detail about him. Okay, so we are now going to learn two short pieces on our sheet from the Rabbi of Hasiatan. Again, our time is short this morning. We're going to start with the first one on top. Okay, the Ohalei, the sefer is called Ohalei Yaakov. And just maybe a word about the sefer. You can't buy this sefer in regular farm stores. There is a gentleman far in the back end of Geula, in Kiryat Belz and Geula, who sells the sefer out of his house. He is the grandson, I think, of the Rebbe's Shamish, okay, and therefore he continues to publish the sefer. And you can only get it. It's a long story for another time. I actually found out about this sefer. I learned about this Rebbe from our teacher, Rabbi Tzvi Weinreb. Rabbi Weinreb once quoted him, and he knows both my affinity for Chassidut as well as obviously my passion for Tzionut. And Rabbi Weinreb mentioned to me, Sam, this is the Rebbe. This is your Rebbe, I think he said to me. And so I asked him where I could find the sefer, and I'll spare the whole story, but he helped me track down how to get to this gentleman and get the sefer, and I went to buy the sefer, and then they offered, do I want a plain paper bag to take the sefer, and when I leave to walk through the streets, I said no, I'm very comfortable walking around with the sefer, but and I think the controversy of the sefer is the fact that he was so, and you'll see in these two short pieces, he was so positive towards the secular entity of the Medina. Yes, of course, he wanted to have influence, and he's going to talk about how we have that influence, but he saw it as something positive. And so let's just jump right in. It is our way to learn and acknowledge how great the merit is of those who have contributed to building up the land of Israel. And therefore, our shita, our approach is always to be what? To participate and be a partner in building the land. Reshit, he says, for two reasons. The first reason is why? B'nesha mitzvah gadola. The first reason, says the Rabbi, is that it's a mitzvah to build up the yishuv here in Eretz Yisrael. V'shenit, mipnei she'iyeh shar la'ashpia al binyan ruchani im ein mishtatfim b'vinyan hachomri. He says because, and the second reason is that we will not have the capacity to influence the spiritual nature and the cultural nature of this fledgling state if what? If we don't put tuchasaf and tish, right? If we don't put ourselves at the table and participate and contribute in the physical realm as well. Ulam ala cheirim afshar rak lashpia b'derech shehoro lana chazal. The way to influence others is only in accordance with the teachings of our chazal. V'ahavta es Hashem elokecha. Okay, we know that there's a mitzvah of loving Hashem. Shehei shem shamayim mitahev al yadecha. What does that mean? It doesn't just mean that we have to express our love for Hashem. It means what? That through our actions, through the way that we behave, others will come to what? To try to emulate your behavior and also come to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. By the way, that's how the Sfat Emet, the Ger Rebbe, explains the mitzvah of Yahavta l'reacha kamocha. Okay, love your neighbor as yourself. The Ger Rebbe asked on that pasuk, nowhere in the Torah does it tell us the parameters of what it means to love ourselves. So if the whole measure of loving your neighbor is based on V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as you love yourself, how do we know if we ever truly fulfill the mitzvah of loving our neighbor? It's totally defined by what? How we love ourselves. So Sas Emes says, no, you got to read that pasuk differently. He says, you have to read this pasuk, V'ahavta kama l'reacha kamocha. The mitzvah of V'ahavta, what's the mitzvah of V'ahavta? V'ahavta es Hashem elokecha. Okay, should be for your re'ah, for your neighbor, as it is for you. And the Sas Emes explains that when we live our lives as a shining example of Avat Hashem and Kiddush Hashem, okay, not because we're on a soapbox preaching to others or talking down to others. We just live our lives of being fabrenta passionate Jews, in love with the Ribbon Shalom and in love with his Torah. It says others are going to see the beauty, and they're also going to want to eventually come to get a taste of it, and they're also going to come to love Hashem as well. And the Rebbe says that's what it means, okay? To love them. How do you bring them closer? By being a shining example of what it means to love Hashem. And he says, "Aval lo b'charufim v'gidufim." He said, but not with harshness or any sarcastic or negativity. Don't talk down to them. Don't be harsh towards others. And even more so, not with speaking ill or not nicely about those who are not yet connected to Torah in the same way we are. What a musar, okay? What an eternal musar from this Rebbe. He said these words in 1949 or 1950. What a musar, more than 70 years later. Okay, what a lesson we need to learn and continue to learn. Okay. There's a very interesting Gemara in Chulin, which the Rebbe is going to base his next teaching we're going to learn together on, and with this we'll close this morning. The Gemara in Chulin talks about when Yaakov Avinu, lays down to have his first dream when he sees the ladder, right? Everyone remembers that dream? And it says that he gathers together a bunch of stones, and then he goes to lay his head on the stones, and then when he wakes up, the pasuk tells us that he took the stone that he laid his head upon. So when he goes to sleep, he gathered a group of stones, and when he wakes up, he took the stones. So the Gemara in Chulin notices that difference between those two psukim, and it says, "Ketiv vayikach me'avnei hamakom," that he took from the stones of the place to lay down his head. Uchtiv, and it also says vayikach et ha'even, and afterwards, when he wakes up, he took the stone. So which is it? Did he have stones or did he have one stone? So now the Gemara explains. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak melamed shenitkapsu kol otan avanim lemakom echad v'chol achat v'achat omeret alai yaniach tzadik zeh rosho. Oh, okay. The first interpretation the Gemara offers is what? That all the stones gathered together as one. Because why? Because each one wanted to be the stone upon which the head of this holy tzaddik, would rest his head. All right. Tana, and it's also taught the kulam nivleu be'echad, and they all blended together and became absorbed in one another and became one stone. Okay, so the Rebbe is going to take this Gemara and see in this Gemara, of course, an eternal message for all of us, or actually two eternal messages. So this is the last piece on our sheets. Haremez shel yitkapsu avanim atzmam. What's this whole story? How the stones gathered themselves together to become one. Okay. This comes to teach us how the Jewish people are going to be meant to conduct ourselves in the future. Meaning, this episode of the stones is what? Setting the tone for how the Jewish people are meant to conduct themselves in the future. Remez hu shebe'inyan Kibbutz Galiut v'Aliyah le'Eretz Yisrael. It's an allusion to the idea of what? Of the ingathering of the exiles and the Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. Tzricha li'ot hit'orut mi'atzmeinu. So the first message the Rebbe says is what? Just as the stones gather themselves together to become one entity, so too, Am Yisrael needs to what? Take the initiative and say, we want to be here in Eretz Yisrael. We want to come to Eretz Yisrael. We want to make Aliyah. We need to make the first move. And to put all our capabilities and kochot behind building this enterprise. That's the first thing. Lo lemor, and not simply say, Adayin lo ba Mashiach, Mashiach still hasn't come, Achake ad she'yavo, v'hu yikachenu, and we should wait till he comes and he'll take us. No. And in the merit of our taking action ourselves, of taking that first step, that will hasten and bring close the Geula Shlema of bringing Mashiach. If we take the first step, and cause that hitaruta dilatata, we cause first that stirring here on earth, then we'll also, please God, soon merit, says the Rebbe, the hitaruta dilaela, the stirring from above. that Hashem will send us finally the Yeshua we've been longing for so long. Okay, that's the first message that the Rebbe sees in our Gemara and Chulin. Okay, now comes the second message. Bitkapsut avanim osatan le'echad merumaz od. And this idea of the stones being gathered together and coming together as one also gives us another illusion. Shekibutz galiut lavad eino maspik l'kiyum ha'omah be'eretz Yisrael. The gathering of the exiles in and of itself is not enough to sustain the nation here in Eretz Yisrael. It's not enough to just what? That we have sheer numbers here. Nachutza achdut gemura, hitlachdut leguf echad. What do we need to sustain and protect the Yishuv here in Eretz Yisrael? We need absolute unity, to come together as one entity. Ha'pirud haya sibat galut. Okay, the separation and disunity is a symptom of the galut, of our dispersion. V'ashalom v'achdut hu atikun. And peace and unity is the fixing for that pirud, that disunity, that is the result, the symptom of the galut, of the dispersion. My friends, we learn from these two incredibly, again, Be'ezrat Hashem, as this course goes on, we'll revisit some of these personalities throughout the year. But we learn from these three beautiful teachings, four beautiful teachings from these two incredible modern masters, the Avodas Kuznets and the Ohalei Yaakov Hasiyatan, that first of all, it bursts our bubble a little bit, that we have this perception that things are very black and white, that the Hasidic world sees the entity of Eretz Yisrael in a certain way. First of all, we learn from these two Rebbes that it's not so black and white. Second of all, we see their beautiful, powerful messages both to their disciples as well as to all of us, in terms of the necessity, number one, to stand behind the Yishuv here in Yisrael, to be a partner, to be active partners, to be willing to put all our energies, even put our lives on the line, to be able to sustain Medinat Yisrael, and that through so doing, Be'ezrat Hashem, we will merit the Gula Shlema, please God, B'karov, and greet together Mashiach Tzidkenu. All right. Next week, in terms of the timing, once again, the schedule is going to change again next week because Rabbi Khan is back. Okay, so next week, this year, Modern Masters is going to meet at 12:20 at the end of the morning. Okay, next week is going to be also very fascinating because we're looking ahead to Shabbat Chevron Parsha Chayei, and we're going to learn a very, very incredibly mystical and deep piece from Rabbi Moshe Wolfson, Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh Livracha, Zchusa Yagen Elenu, who just passed away a few months ago. He's a longtime Mashgiach Kuchani of Yeshiva TORAH Avodas and a master of Chassidut in and of his own right. And his beautiful sefer Emunah Sitecha, he has an incredibly powerful essay on the significance of Chevron and Chevron Yer HaKodesh, and the connection between Chevron Yer HaKodesh and Yerushalayim Yer HaKodesh. And we're going to learn that powerful piece together as an introduction to the thought of Rabbi Wolfson. So that'll be next week.